We've got a lot to cover today. The president is barnstorming the country even while the economy is in shambles. Will the president ever learn what we know, that government is best which governs least? That the people are entitled to a government that stays within the confines of the Constitution? That the Constitution was written to keep the government off the people's backs? I have often argued that the reason we have the rise of the Tea Party this election season is twofold. First, the Republicans under President George W. Bush proved themselves utterly unworthy of governing within the confines of the Constitution. They fought 2 illegal wars, created enormous deficits, gave hundreds of billions of your money to rich bankers, federalized education and seniors' prescription drugs, spied on us without warrants, and arrested people without putting them on trial. The second and more controversial reason is the sad similarity in the 2 major political parties today. To demonstrate that similarity, I have argued here at Fox and in my speeches around the country that we don't even have a 2-party system any longer. We have one party, the big government party. It has a Republican wing that likes deficits, corporate welfare, assaults on civil liberties, and war. It has a Democratic wing that likes taxes, individual welfare, assaults on commercial liberties, and war. Both wings of the big government party think that government can right any wrong, regulate any behavior, and tax any event. Now along comes the Tea Party, and on paper, it stands for basic Jeffersonian principles that the federal government can only regulate in the 16 areas of behavior that the Constitution gives it, that our freedoms come from our humanity, not from the government, that the states which have given power to the feds can take it back, that we are entitled to sound money and only the gold standard can produce that, and that we should only fight defensive wars. It sounds straightforward, libertarian, and constitutional. But do they mean it? Or will even the strongest of Tea Party candidates, once elected, join the ranks of big government? I firmly believe that Tea Party candidates will win next month and will go to Washington intending to preserve our freedoms. But once there, will they change Washington, or will it change them? With me now is just the right person to talk about all this, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. She's a good friend of mine. She's also chair of the House Tea Party caucus. Congresswoman Bachmann, I know you're in the midst of a campaign. You're kind enough to join us, and thanks for coming on the Glenn Beck program. Let me get right down to it. Do people change when they get to Washington? Is the essence of the congressional task one of compromise with one's ideological opponents? And if so, how could anybody stick to their principles?
Well, Judge, I have watched people come into public office, and I've watched them melt like wax under the Klieg lights of the pressure from the special interest groups and the lobbyists. A person needs to know very strongly who they are and what they believe before they ever go to Washington, D.C. They also need to know that they are somebody before they ever get to Washington, D.C., or before they ever have a title in front of their name. If a title is what makes them important, then people will do anything to hold that title. I think we're seeing candidates run in this election cycle who know who they are, who know what they believe, and who won't be so susceptible to melting when they get to Washington, D.C. And to that end, as a part of the Tea Party caucus, I am going to be starting classes on a weekly basis for our new members of Congress on the Constitution. And I'm asking experts from around the country to come in every week and teach our constitutional principles. And Judge, I'll ask you right now on national TV if you'll come in and be one of our experts and lead our members of Congress in these principles. I'm serious about this because we have to make sure that they know what it is that we're swearing to uphold.
I'm deeply flattered about the offer, Congresswoman, and I thank you for it. But do you agree with me about the reasons for the rise of the Tea Party? That the Republicans, when last they ran the show, ran it as if they were liberal Democrats or Republicans in name only?
Well, there's no question that the Republicans have made huge mistakes, spending mistakes, crossing constitutional boundaries, and they have literally been slapped upside the head by the voters in the last 2 elections, rightly so. I think now they're listening. quite unlike the Democrat Party. I think they're listening. I think that they're prepared to lead. But again, we can't just trust that Republicans are going to do the right thing.
All right,
they have to be held accountable.
You're going to have Republicans like you, like Rand Paul, like Sharon Engel. You're also going to have Republicans like Mike Castle. Maybe a bad example because he lost his primary
he won't be
to
back.
Christine O'Donnell.
Mike Castle won't be back.
But you will have Republicans like that, centrist Republicans, Scott Brown from Massachusetts, who will try to dilute the Tea Party message. Will they succeed?
You know, I think there will always be an attempt by the ruling class to make sure that they have the upper hand. But this is a very different election. This election, Judge, captures the spirit of 1776. And I don't think that the American people are going to stand for a moment for their members of Congress going into the usual default position of Washington, D.C. and the ruling class.
Okay.
I think you're going to see a very different insurgency in January of 2011.
I understand that the Tea Party movement and you and many Republicans, and I agree with you, do not want to spend more than we take in, do not want to legislate in areas that the Constitution doesn't authorize. But what about the area of civil liberties? For example, Congresswoman Bachmann, should the government be able to hack into your email without a search warrant from a judge?
I think that's a very serious issue and one that I don't think anyone wants to see happen going forward.
But it happens under the Patriot Act, which many Republicans, most respectfully yourself included, voted for.
That's true. The Patriot Act was a bundle of different measures that were put together in response to the terror attack on 9/11. Clearly, the federal government needs to have the appropriate authority to deal with the issue of terror. But on the other hand, it can't be at the expense of civil liberties. You know better than anyone else, Judge, that's what the Bill of Rights is all about, to secure our individual liberties from an overweening, huge, bureaucratic, large, big government. And so we've got to get the balance and the tension right between individual liberties and the government's prerogative and duty to keep the American people safe.
You know, if I teach that class for you, I'm going to argue that it's not a balance, it's a bias in favor of human freedom. Freedom is the default position.
We'd love it if you'd do that. Come and teach.
Thank you, Congresswoman Michelle Bachmann. We appreciate your time. Now thank you. Now the big story on your mind, your money. Up to 40 state attorneys general are expected to announce an investigation into the mortgage servicing industry. This comes as mortgage service companies have been accused of submitting fraudulent documents in thousands of foreclosure proceedings all across the country. Now some on Capitol Hill are calling for a moratorium on all foreclosures until the documentation issue is resolved. Will this help? John Tamny is the editor of Real Clear Markets. Nancy Skinner, host of The Nancy Skinner Show. And Charlie Gasparino, aside from being the greatest business reporter in the world, is my friend and my colleague on the Fox Business Network. He's also the author of, you can see it right there, Bought and Paid For, the unholy alliance between Barack Obama and Wall Street. Nancy, to you first. Democrats in Congress, even the president resisted them, wanted some sort of a national moratorium on mortgage foreclosures, a law that the Congress would enact, which would tell state courts, thou shalt not hear these mortgage foreclosure cases until we tell you to. Do you go along with that?
You know, I do. Judge, because if banks are actually, as we have evidence now, and this needs to be investigated, and I don't think it has to be long-term, a very short-term moratorium, but if they are foreclosing fraudulently on my neighbor, then the value of my home goes down, and we have this downward spiral in the housing market. So we already have knowledge that some of the Bank of America and others signing 8,000 foreclosures without even looking at those documents.
Okay, but what business is it of the federal government?
It's criminal. It's criminal.
But it's not. Nancy, these are state cases in state courts, and the Supreme Court has already ruled that the Congress can't tell the state court systems how to operate. Isn't this just a political ploy whereby the Democrats want to make people think they're doing something for them, which they know or ought to know is patently unconstitutional?
If the federal government is trying to revive this economy and these banks are taking criminal action to hurt the economy, it is the duty of the government to go after those banks and stop fraudulent and criminal activity.
All right, John, what happens to the economy, big picture, if all mortgage foreclosures are stopped? Even the good ones, even the ones where we know who owned the paper and we have the proper documentation.
Well, I mean, I think first off, what it's going to mean is that housing can't reach its natural level. And that's essential, so that we need this market signal telling investors to stop putting money into housing and get it into productive assets. But let's be honest, this should not surprise us what's happening in Congress. When the banks were bailed out, and they should not have been, basically they were bought and paid for by Washington, and Washington is coming back to get what it wants from them. When you take government money, you are essentially working for political masters that don't care about profits. And now with elections coming up, is it any surprise that Congress is coming back and saying, stop foreclosures? This is kind of a crucial time for us.
All right, Charlie, on the front cover of this book, Bought and Paid For, The Unholy Alliance Between Barack Obama and Wall Street, you have pictures of the president in front of the White House with pigs. Who are the pigs?
Well, the pigs are the heads of these banks. And I'll tell you, John was exactly right. Listen, this is a BS scandal. People are not being thrown out of their homes for any other reason than, you know, some guy didn't dot an I or cross a T. I mean, people can't afford their homes. That's why they're leaving. Right. They're foreclosing on. But what John said is absolutely right, and it was the point of Bought and Paid For, is that there is this unholy alliance. And, you know, once you get bailed out by the federal government, you are wards of the federal government. And every now and then, you're going to have to be part of a political ploy.
All right, tell me if my scenario is right, Charlie, and I'm basing it on a historical example. If people know that they won't be foreclosed on their homes, they may just stop paying their mortgages. What will happen to the banks that require and expect those billions of dollars to come in every month?
Well, what the banks want to do now is foreclose on those homes so they can sell them to people that can afford them. What this process is doing is preventing that from happening. So you're preventing the sort of price discovery that needs to be done in the market so we know where mortgages, where housing should be priced at. But there is a bigger picture here.
What's the bigger picture?
The bigger picture is how they're in bed together. I mean, listen, the Wall Street firms, I will tell you, because we've been breaking stories on Fox Business Network all day about this, that tomorrow they're going to announce this sort of big-time investigation and that other firms are joining this moratorium. But the bigger picture is they're in bed together. They know that this is the price of doing business with government.
Does Wall Street like this president,
minute,
Nancy?
Judge,
Hang on. Does Wall Street like this president the way Charlie claims they do?
Well, you know, I think they like this president because he stabilized the economy under meltdown.
And he helped them make billions of dollars in bonuses, Nancy. Billions. Look at the Wall Street Journal today.
Right.
Billions of bonuses just a minute after the financial collapse.
And here's the problem. And here's the problem with that. We bailed out those banks because they told us our entire economy was going to melt down. And now 50% of the revenues of banks are going out
Why
in compensation.
Why did Barack Obama keep? Here's the question I ask you. Why did the president? Why did this president keep the bailout mechanisms in place for 2 years? Every time he calls him a fat cat, it's shame on him, as my book points out, because he made them fat.
Nancy.
You don't give them money. You don't put this money out there. TARP was a Bush-initiated project, and there was.
How about the low interest rates? How about all the guarantees on debt?
Nancy,
both
parties are to blame here. Nancy, $2 trillion has been spent since the beginning of TARP. About $750 billion under Bush, and the remainder under President Obama. You can't point a finger at one of the two parties. Neither of them understands how the economy works, because unemployment is just as bad now as it was before they started to spend the $2 trillion.
So the whole theory, Judge, just let me finish. If you are paying 50% of your bank's revenues out in compensation, $100 million bonuses, tax deductible, and not lending it to people so that they can start businesses,
hang on, Charlie.
I got to
bring John.
And that's a problem.
John Tamney, the Wall Street bonuses, they were enormous. It is projected that Wall Street will earn a profit in 2010 of $450 billion. Do the folks who got those enormous bonuses deserve them? And if they do, what does it tell us about the economy?
I think they deserve them. I think Wall Street should be able to pay its employees as much as it possibly can. I am for profits. But here lies the problem, once again, with being in bed with government. When you take bailout money, you get the good with the bad. You get a Washington that's going to react very negatively to these guys doing well. But let's think about the other choice. We claim to love profits, but in this scenario, what if they didn't pay them the proper wages? They would all leave the banks, and the banks would be even weaker.
John, here's the problem. It's not just TARP. There's guarantees and benefits that this administration has heaped on Wall Street. They are not making money the good old-fashioned capitalist way. This is crony capitalism. Listen, my book points it out. Hook, line, and sinker. You will see, if you read this book, just how many ways they made money out of this administration. Obamonomics, you had winners and losers. The losers were Main Street, 10% unemployment. The winners are Wall Street, $140 billion.
Nancy